2020 vocal surgery, vocal recovery, possible new tour, a new album, and a walk down memory lane. Next, on part 4 of my Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi Story documentary, a review. Next on Heels and Quads.
Heels and Quads Media, the place where metal lives. Tommy and Levi are taking full control. Screaming vocals, thunderous bass, and crushing beats. Heels and Quads Media, where the metal scene leads.
Welcome back, Heels and Quads Media, here on YouTube. I am Tommy, and I'm back with part 4 of my Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi Story review. It's been a couple of days. I've seen over the weekend people start to view the first 3 videos. 2 isn't doing as well as I thought it would, which is weird because that's slippery when wet in New Jersey. But that's okay. People will find it. I'm really excited about the response that the documentary itself has got. I also watched the interview with Jon and Michael Strahan from last night. A lot to unpack overall, because this is part 4, this is the end. They start with Jon going to Obie O'Brien's house in Delaware, seeing a lot of the old equipment from the old New Jersey studio, and kind of having a walk down memory lane with Living on a Prayer demo and the different line, just hang tough, we'll make it, I swear. Jon makes a note to say that you can't hit those notes at 60. Shouldn't have been able to hit those notes at 20 or 22, whatever he was then in 86. Then they go into Richie's departure, kind of follow up on that, or end that. You get Richie in a different setting a year later from the first interview. He seems a little more at peace in this part with everything, which is understandable. I mean, it's an extra year he's been out of the band and away from the band. I'm sure at that point he had probably seen, because in Jon's interviews for the documentary, he talks about how Richie came to his house and they watched part of the documentary. And I think that time heals wounds. And while I said in the part 3 video that if Bon Jovi is going to be done touring as a touring band, as a touring act, they need to hash out their differences with Richie, get in a room, figure it out, and at least give us one solid week run at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on their home turf. And whether Jon's voice is fully healed or not, if he decided to retire then at least he's at home, at least he's around, that Jersey support. Then you can add in the Michael Strahan interview from last night here as well. It's kind of like this was all building up to something. Obviously, with the promotion and the press that this documentary is getting, it kind of all along felt like, yeah, of course they're going to tour again. Now, Jon says it'll be next year if they do, and that leaves hope that they'll work this out with Richie. And Jon says that, he's welcome. Jon's not hard to find. The band's not hard to find. If he wants to jump up and play with Phil and Jon, Shanks, that is, then he's more than welcome, which is kind of weird. More or less, and I had a comment yesterday that someone said that Jon Shanks needs to go. And while I agree with that as far as a performer, he is a pretty good producer, and he helped out a lot with the songwriting, especially on the last few records. I agree he should not be a stage performer. However, I wonder what the dynamic between Phil and Richie would be. Would Phil be okay possibly taking a back seat and playing a little more rhythm? Or would they kind of do like a dueling lead kind of thing as opposed to a rhythm guitarist and a lead guitarist. I think that obviously Richie has earned a spot in this band forever. I mean, you think of Bon Jovi, for the common folk, you think of Bon Jovi, which, notwithstanding the people who consider Jon Bon Jovi's name to just be Bon Jovi, for the fans, not even the diehards, but fans of the band who've seen the band live, typically when you think of Bon Jovi, you think of John and Richie. Diehards, we think of John, Richie, David, Tico, Alec, and Hugh, because Hugh's been such a big part of the band since the beginning. So you can think of two bass players. And then, even Bobby, when Bobby came to fill in, and they talk about that in this part of the documentary, in the last part, Bobby was there because they knew that it would eventually happen. It wasn't if, it was a matter of when. And looking back now, it kind of makes sense with especially Lost Highway. That's kind of when Richie seemed to be in the peak of his issues. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm just, as a fan looking in, it seems like that is kind of where it all really got bad. And Lost Highway is a great record. Richie plays great on it. Obviously the vocal harmonies were still there. And then we go into the Circle. They talk about the Circle tour 11, Richie, which I guess kind of technically wasn't the Circle tour anymore, because they did the Circle, and then they did I think it was just called Live 2011, which I saw them on that. I saw them on the Circle tour, and I saw them in 11, which I was part of that first group to see Phil X. And even though I knew Richie wasn't going to be there, I still went in with like the hope, because they announced, like, I got an email that said, even though you bought tickets, just like basically a heads up, Richie Sambora won't be there. And I was really bummed, because Richie's always been my favorite member of the band. I think Richie's an outstanding, not only backup vocalist, and co-harmony lead vocalist, but a vocalist overall, lead vocalist. His solo albums are great. I think that when that happened, it just kind of I always bought the records, no matter what. And then What About Now came out, and Richie was back, and I bought that. And I even bought the single when Because We Can first hit. And I was just like, it doesn't feel the same. And even, I think they made two different versions of the video and song, one without a solo and one with a guitar solo. So they don't really touch on that. It's more of the Fighter and why that is the main, like, the straw that broke the camel's back, like I said in part 3. But I kind of wonder if, like, Richie, that was kind of like John's way of, like, reaching out to Richie and be like, hey, we've already done it, but if you want to go lay down a solo, we'll have two different versions that come out of this song. They go through This House Is Not For Sale, 2020. Then it's John's vocal recovery throughout, and he tries to sing. He's in the home studio. He tries to sing. It doesn't. He says it sounds like shit. It shows him walking around outside. Then it basically builds up and builds up and builds up, and it ends with the recording or eventual rehearsal of the new single Legendary, which I've reviewed on the channel. Go back and watch that. While you're at it, subscribe, leave a comment, like this video, of course, like all the videos, and leave comments on all the videos. Tell me how you feel about my thoughts on it. A summary of the whole thing. I think the documentary is very well done. I think at times it's one-sided, but also I think that they did a pretty good job of looking at it from both sides of the story. Now, to every story, there's two sides and there's two truths. There's each individual truth, and then there's the actual truth. I think that, especially, Bon Jovi's always been the band, and they've said in previous documentaries and interviews that, they don't air their dirty laundry in public, which this is a huge deal, and it became public. But it's always been very vague why Richie left the band, why Richie didn't return to the band. And I see it from both sides. Now, obviously, I just said I'm a huge Richie Sambora fan, but I'm a huge Bon Jovi fan, and I just want the band to be whole again. And I don't think it's going to be whole without Richie there. They made it without Alec, but like I said earlier, Hugh has been such a huge part of the history of this band, and the fans welcomed him. I like Phil X. I think he's got a great personality. I think he's a great guitar player. I think he could potentially bring a lot to the table if he was allowed to bring it. I don't know that for sure either, but I don't feel like he's allowed to be the best Phil X he can be, because his bands that he's in are a little heavier. His biggest influence is Eddie Van Halen. You can watch his YouTube videos, and they're fantastic. And he's a great, great guitar player. And while I understand even somebody in his position where you don't really play that kind of music necessarily, or that's not really your expertise, you're a little more harder rock, like, it's gotta sting a little bit when you're asked to replace somebody and he talks about it. And while, it's a great gig. It's one of the biggest bands in the world of all time. Over 100 million albums sold. And it's easy to say yes to that, but it's also kind of shitty for him, because not so much playing the Richie parts, because I think that would be awesome for any guitar player to be able to play, the Richie Sambora parts in Bon Jovi. I think it's shitty because now that Richie's been gone over a decade, that Phil's been there, paying his dues, playing the road, gaining fans, gaining part of this Bon Jovi fan base, even though there's a few, and sometimes myself included, that are always going to say it's not Bon Jovi without Richie. It's just, that's the Bon Jovi we grew up with. That's the Bon Jovi that we fell in love with. But I think this band would be a lot better, Richie notwithstanding. If they're not going to do a reunion with Richie, let Phil show his chops. Let Phil X do his thing. Let him have his own solos. Like, I honestly, going back to what I said earlier, I honestly don't even know why John Shanks is there. Like, it's cool to have, all that stuff going on to fill the gaps and stuff, but I don't think it's necessary. And he could be the nicest guy in the world, and I'm not shitting on him by any means. I just don't think he's a good fit. He's very, very statuesque on stage, and it just kind of brings it down. John's moving around, Phil moves around, bangs his head. Tico's an animal. David Bryan is the animal. I've called him Animal. That's been my nickname for him forever. Hugh's just, funky David Letterman. That's what he's always reminded me of. David Letterman with a funky bass line. But yeah, what did you think about the documentary? That's more important than what I think about it, because I'm just rambling. And I'm a fan of the band. I'm a fan of Richie Sambora. I'm a fan of John. Tico, Dave, Hugh, or as, the fans call him, Huge. I want to know what you think about it. Have you seen the whole thing? Are you watching reviews on YouTube? How are you doing it? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like at times it's kind of a hit piece? Do you feel like me, it's kind of, they see it this way and then they see it this way and then they kind of come together in the middle, and then you're still just kind of undecided on what actually happened? Because that's where I'm sitting. I still don't feel like we're getting either side's truth. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like this video, subscribe, and of course, tell your friends, tell your enemies, and I'll see you next time.